All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started for the sake of staying on time, even as others continue to join. This is Shannon Robshaw with the TA Network for Children's Behavioral Health. Thank you very much for joining us today for the our bi-monthly Rural Learning Community webinar. And this month we're going to be focusing on building family leadership and voice, working as partners, strategies for working as partners with family organizations and family leaders in systems of care in states and communities. And we're excited to have Joy Hogue with Mississippi Families as Allies, a family leader in the family-run organization there in Mississippi, and Wendy Luckenbill, who is actually with a managed care organization, but again serves as a senior family leader within that organization and helps the organization partner with families. So we're really excited that they could be here with us today, and we're looking forward to hearing from them in just a few minutes. Again, my name is Shannon Robshaw, and these are the key points of contact if you would like to contact us with the Rural Mental Health Learning Collaborative. So Matt Buckman is one of my co-leads. He's a clinician from a rural part of Illinois. And then Christina Paternoster this is her first time as a co-lead here today. She's a family leader from Pennsylvania. And then administrative support is Sarah Warner with the TA Network. And we would welcome hearing from you on your thoughts about today's webinar, on any suggestions that you may have for future content. We would appreciate that feedback. I also wanted to take a minute and let you all know, if you haven't already heard, that the TA Network is standing up a new technology platform to support all of its learning communities that we have within the network, and there are many. And we have created a new mechanism to support the webinars, to provide additional content and resources, and all of the past webinars are also housed within that platform and consolidated into themes or courses, and so organized in that way so you can tap into those multiple webinars that would work together to really build your knowledge base around a particular area. And that's true of the Rural Learning Collaborative, and it's also true of the other learning communities within supported in that platform. So I really do encourage you to investigate that and join in. It's the way you'll need to be registering for these webinars going forward. You can see in the chat box there, it says ideas. There's a website address and the link where you can access that. It's Ideas at the Institute, and the link right there. And you will need to set up you will need to establish an account to be able to access all those resources and to sign up and register for the webinars. It's super easy to do. You just use your email address and create your own password, and then you can log in and you can join any number of the rural communities and access lots of resources available through that platform. So I really do encourage you to go ahead and do that if you can. Also, at the end of the webinar today, there's going to be a link for you to please fill out a very brief evaluation so we can get your feedback directly, and we can take that and use it to help us inform future webinars and future content. So it just takes a very few minutes. It's very brief, so we would really encourage you and ask you to please stay on at the end of the webinar for that very brief little evaluation. I'm going to ask Matt Buckman if he wants to chime in and talk a little bit more about the rural mental health learning community and some of the resources we're planning.
Yes, certainly. And what I want to mention is just that oftentimes rural-specific resources, expertise is pretty scarce in our systems. And so we have a lot of communities that are systems of care and other communities that are working hard to be able to serve those who are living in rural settings. And so what we're wanting to be able to do is I just want to say that this is something that will be designated specific to resources that can be PDFs, online resources, tools that are useful, all of these webinars and other types of courses that we'll be creating, and talk about this as a bi-directional relationship, that if you know of really good resources you would like to be able to have on there that you think other communities would benefit from, and other people throughout your state or other states, please send those to me or anyone on the team. We're happy to be able to share those and post those so that others can utilize those resources. And then also to say that we're going to be filling in lots of good things that, again, apply specific to those of us who are working in rural settings. So we hope that you will visit, check out the resource, create an account, and start to utilize this as a tool that can support your communities. Thanks,
Matt. And now I'd like for Christina to make a few comments. We're real happy with our little team now. My background is systems level leadership within systems of care. Matt's got a clinical background, and now we have Christina, who's a family leader. And so we really, we're deliberate in trying to bring those three perspectives to this learning community in the hopes that, we have the fullest perspective we can and really understand the different needs and different strategies and resources from different angles. And so I'm just really happy to have this team together. And so, Christina, did you want to make any comments?
Sure. Thanks, Shannon. Hi, everybody. My name is Christina Paternoster, and I'm really thrilled to be working as a code lead with Shannon and Matt, bringing the family perspective to the group. I'm a family member. I'm a mom of 3 great young adults who happen to have some challenges. I raised my family in Tioga County, Pennsylvania, which is pretty rural Pennsylvania. We're in between Williamsport, which is the home of the Little League World Series, and Corning, New York. So we're up there. I guess part of my first official act is to get some of our questions launched to find out who's joining us today.
Yeah.
So if you can tell us how you can best describe your role.
So I see we've got a lot of mental health agency representation, some local, some health agency representation, family organizations. Everybody want to just take one more minute? I'd like to get a few more responses in. How many people, what's our total? Okay. All right, so primarily, I mean, we've got an array of folks. We've got some people from Medicaid, a couple of people, private providers, health agencies, youth organizations, family organizations, others in the comment box. Okay, other state agencies, homeless provider, peer-run organization, systems of care. All right, well, that's good. Let's close up that poll. And Christine, I got confused on my notes, so I'll help you with these, and then we can shift on to the other questions as well. And then your role in that organization, if you could indicate, please. Executive leadership, project director, youth support provider, family support providers, TA providers. Give it just another couple of minutes. Supervisors. And others. Let's see, quality manager, family advocate, civil rights leader, that's exciting. family support partner, unpaid state advocate, can't get enough of those, statewide family lead. Okay, great. All right, well, that's helpful. Thank you, everyone, for sharing that information with us so we can understand who we're talking with today. And then I wanted just to take one more minute and talk about our learning objectives. I guess we'll see them in a minute, but just to introduce again, as we had said at the very beginning, we want to hear from Joy and from Wendy about what strategies for engaging families, but also strategies. One of the things that I have had in multiple conversations with states and communities that I have worked with is they struggle to work with building an actual organization or helping families build their own organization leadership structure. So we're also going to hear about strategies for that today. So Christina, did you want to kind of talk about the next question?
So really just asking everybody how they heard about today's webinar so that we know how we're getting the word out to everyone and staying connected. So looks like we've got some great write-in answers. Thanks to everybody for sharing. It looks like there's a lot of sharing and newsletters being picked up. That's fantastic news. Thanks.
A lot of TA Telegram. If you all are not on the TA Telegram list, please contact any one of us and we will add you to the Telegram. There's a lot of really great resources in that. Okay, great. Okay, so as I said, I've talked a little bit about the learning objectives and working directly with families and engaging them with services for planning and service delivery, but also, again, with a focus on building sustained family leadership and voice within a system of care, within states and communities, within rural areas in particular, and how organizations, provider organizations or systems of care leaders can actually cultivate and build strong partnerships with family organizations and family leaders within the state with the goal of sustaining that partnership long term and building the strength of the family movement in terms of their ability to really impact ongoing system of care development. Christina, did you want to add anything before we turn it over to Joy around that perspective or anything else about today's webinar?
I just want to remind everybody that you can chat in throughout the presentation your questions, any questions that may pop up for the presenters. And after each presenter's presentation, we will we'll take a little bit of time to do some Q&A. So as questions come up in your mind, just chat those in there and we'll take care of them.
Great. All right, so I think now we're going to turn it over to our first presenter, Joy Hogue.
Okay, thank you, Shannon and Christine. I'm very excited to be here. I was glad to have this opportunity. I'm in Mississippi, so I'm in a state that's mostly rural. And it's also interesting to me because this webinar came around at a very helpful time for us, too, because we're initiating a new project where we're trying to engage we're trying to engage families around the state who are providing kinship care. And I did see that we have at least one kinship person on the webinar, so I was excited to see that. But we're looking at these very issues ourselves, like how do we make sure we're reaching out in such a way that we're engaging families from the very beginning of this project so that the families from that population are the ones driving everything that happens with it and leading it and establishing the policy. So I'll be sharing some lessons from that too. And we're going to start with a question, and we want to keep everyone engaged, but we also, I've learned, one thing I've learned in presenting over the years, that I often learn much more from the audience than they learn from me. So we want to start off by everybody learning from each other. And if you could take this poll and answer the question, what are the opportunities you see for families to engage in system leadership in rural areas? So I'll give everybody a few minutes to respond to that. I'm seeing some really good things, especially about including families from the very beginning in governance councils. That's incredibly important. And I don't know if this is mentioned specifically anywhere within this presentation. There are leadership training is an invaluable tool with that to train families from the very beginning. I'm also seeing a lot of things about involving families in service provision. That can be particularly helpful in rural areas because I think we all know what a challenge workforce development is in rural areas. And as we're going through this presentation today, I think you'll also get ideas for ways not only to that in increasing family engagement in systems leadership, it's also helping address some of those workforce development issues. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. I like this. I think this is an opportunity to move community and cultural belief systems away from stigmatizing and pathologizing families and children who need behavioral health supports, making it normalized and an integral part of wellness care. And that's such an important point in everything about integrated care and mental health being part of health, and that can be particularly relevant in rural areas where there's not necessarily a lot of mental health standalone mental health services, and how can it be integrated into other things. And that also points to the need to make sure, as we're looking at ways to engage families in systems level leadership, that it may not be in the mental health system. There may be another system that it makes much more sense to partner with for that to happen. And I'm just skimming. I love this. We would like to engage them in policy writing and program development. That's great to do that from the very beginning. Okay. Okay. And I think we're ready to go back to the slide. Okay, so this is just a little bit about families as allies, and I know everyone can read slides, but on this particular one, I am going to read it to just emphasize a few things. So this is basically our elevator speech that we think conveys the most important things about our organization. We're the only statewide organization run by and for families of children with mental health challenges in Mississippi. So all of our staff and most of our board members are raising or have raised a child with some sort of mental health challenge. We support each other, which we do a lot of very grassroots support in Mississippi, a lot on the phone, a lot of coaching, a lot of training families on the ground ground level. And then this is what's really relevant to today's presentation. We work together to make things better for our children. So we do a lot of leadership training with families, a lot of collaborating with other organizations on policy, and then working together to affect things, policies and legislation in the state. Our vision is that all children will have the opportunity to reach their potential and succeed, and our mission is that families are partners in their children's care. And sometimes, now I hope no one on this particular webinar thinks this, but sometimes when people hear that, they think that we mean that we make families do stuff, including that if they call us up as a family-run organization, that we'll gather up some families for them and, assist them and make them, serve on a leadership council or whatever. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the system itself should be family-driven. So we're much more likely to focus on helping our system partners learn more about family-driven practice and how their system and their services can be family-driven so that those family leaders who are really already out there start emerging. And our core values define us. And these are things we value ourselves and that we strive to help all of the systems that work with our children value as well. Every child and family, excellence, partnership, and accountability. So our work is based on the Federation of Families definition of what family-driven practice is, and I think everybody's probably familiar with that definition, that it's about families know what's best for their own child, but they also know what's best for all children, and families coming together and being able to be that voice and that driving force at the practice level and the policy level, and to be able to start affecting things like how money is spent and those types of things. So we have some core beliefs that guide our work on a day-to-day basis to make sure that we stay focused on those things. And these things are true both at the individual family level, but at the systems level. So families know their children better than anyone else does. And these all sound good, but sometimes can be kind of challenging to think about. And thinking at the systems level, what if families, are brought together and on that governance council, they want policies to be different or they want money to be spent in a different way that they think will make things go more in the direction of what their children want and need. And to be able, as we're looking at this and how we engage families, to think about comfort level with that and what can help each of us grow in our ability to really partner with families in that way. Families are their children's strongest advocates, and if you ever feel like families aren't advocating for their children, it may just be that they're advocating for something that you're not noticing they're advocating about. And also that systems should follow laws and policies about families and children's rights. And it is interesting that in most systems there are laws, and I think one that often comes to mind is IDEA in the education system, that really are about supporting family-driven practice. So that's kind of a lot of language, but we like to just stop and think about, to help people really think about what family-driven practice means, is to think about when you're getting ready to go on a trip, what do you know you need? Or what do you know when you're getting ready to walk to your car? And if we were all together in one room, people could say their answers out loud. But I'm just going to reflect on some things that people often say. When you get ready to get in your car to go somewhere, you typically know where you're going. You know the routes you want to take, and you know who you want in the car with you. And we encourage people, both in looking at family-driven practice at the individual family level, but also at the systems level, to think about that, and that families know those same things. They know where they want to go. And they know the path they want to take to get there. And that doesn't mean that they necessarily, like at the systems level, are going to know everything about how a committee runs and Robert's Rules of Order, but they know the kind of the way they want, where they want to get with their children, what they want for their children, and the way they want that to happen, the kind of partnerships they want to have, the way things work together on that journey. And they know who they want in the car with them. And so I want you to think about those things for a minute and then reflect on this next slide and just think about, in your work with families, have you ever felt like you've been left on the side of the road, either working with individual families or trying to work with families and engage them at the systems level to become more actively involved in leadership? And it's really easy to characterize that when that experience happens as the families did something that either they were resistant or they didn't comply or they weren't interested. But it may just be that they were actually driving their own car, either for their individual family or for the system itself, and they're driving in a different direction. So it's always good to reflect when you have this feeling, if you do have it, about what might have happened that you got put out of that car. Now, this is just a little bit about Mississippi, and I think how I came to be on this webinar. You can see that the more green an area is, the more rural it is. So I'm pretty much in an all-green state with a few splotches of, well, a sort of fair amount of some yellow, which is a little more populated, and a few little splotches of red on the map. So our state is primarily rural, and it's rural in a lot of different ways in different areas. And even the areas that are urban might not seem so urban to some of you guys. For example, I'm in the capital city, which is Jackson, and I think Jackson itself is about 140,000, and if you put it, it's got some little towns around it. Altogether, it's just 300,000 in this Tri-County area. So a lot of what we do is very rural in our outreach. And these are just some things that in doing work in Mississippi that we've learned to think about. One is that not all rural areas are created equal. If we go, I'm going to go back to this map for a second. If you look up in this area of the state, that is an area that's extremely impoverished in Mississippi. The Mississippi River's right over here. This is often referred to as the Delta in Mississippi. It's where the river overflowed. It was where, and you know, I think Mississippi is the state that always ends up, I think, making other states feel better. You know, we have a really, really difficult history when it comes to slavery and civil rights. Most of the plantations and slavery ownership, although it was all over Mississippi and all over the South, was primarily in this area, and it's continued to be an area where there's a lot of disparities, a lot more. It's a predominantly African American area. There's a lot of poverty, and there's a lot of real rich history from the civil rights movement in that area. This area over here is more, it's got a lot of rural area, but it tends to be more, have a much more, a higher concentration of people who are not African American. We have in this area the Choctaw Nation, which is an Indian tribe that's in Mississippi. And then down on the coast, there's a little bit more of some of that red with some more urban areas. But it's also an area that's pretty rural, and it's very influenced by the culture of New Orleans. So to just keep in mind, it's not really just about are we working with an urban area or a rural area, but what is this rural area and what about it? What are its distinctions and what are ways to reach out in that area that are going to be most effective with families? And just those areas that I mentioned, these are some ways that we have found to be really effective. In the Delta, we have a lot of partners who are actually those grassroots civil rights groups, and we partner a lot with them. For example, our leadership training, we just did it. We're doing it in several areas of Mississippi this week or this month. And a couple weeks ago, we did it in Jackson, but some of them came, and they wanted to see what it was like and how it fit with their work and if it did. And we always want to invite people to do that, especially if they're from a different part of the state, to come see how what we're doing might work for them. And then what they were looking at is how they could take it back and adapt it where they are. So I think that's one thing that's really important to think about in rural areas. It may not be you that needs to go do the work. It may be partnering with those natural leaders and the people who are out there doing the grassroots work anyway, so that if they can learn to do that thing or want to learn to do that thing and they can embed it, like if they can be the one to teach people how to do peer support or leadership training or how to train families about policy, that's going to have a much more lasting impact in that area than saying we have this special program and we want you to come learn it from us. In Northeast Mississippi, it has worked really well to partner with our mental health providers. And with the Choctaw Reservation, we have had, it has taken us a long time to form partnerships with them, but one thing we have learned is state systems that they're already partnering with. If we're partnering with those systems and can find someone who can partner with us and introduce us and help foster that relationship, that's been a good strategy. And then, so that's, just looking at what's unique about that particular rural area. And then also to remember that both at the individual level and when families don't appear to want to be involved in systems level leadership, that doesn't always mean they're not interested. And I would say at the systems level, it's important to look for families who maybe the reason they're not coming to what you're trying to get them to do is they are already doing this work. So as you form relationships with partners who are already in the area, ask them what families are already out there doing things. And that happened with us just the other day on the Kinship Care Project. We're reaching out to people who are doing early intervention work throughout the state to see what things are like in their area and who the grandparents are who are already helping take care of their children, who might want the support and can help us design a navigator program that they think will work for them. And we started hearing about, there's so-and-so in this community, and she's always down at the health department telling them what they need to be doing. Those are the kinds of stories you want to find out about in rural communities and see if that person can be someone who will engage with you in those projects and can also help engage other families, because that person's going to be in the community much longer than any of us or any particular project. And then as part of that, to remember that it's possible to show you care without showing up in person. I think sometimes we get, especially with system of care projects or initiatives, we get very focused on let's do this activity to reach out to families and to find those leaders. And I'm not telling you not to do that. But sometimes I think the most effective ways to actually engage families over the long haul, especially those families who are going to start making a difference at the systems level, is to go in a much more subtle way. Finding those cultural ambassadors, those families who are already doing things in the community, and either engage them in your project or engage them in engaging others. And then groups that are already doing grassroots work of any kind, be it a church, be it civil rights, be it a school that's really involved in helping families, if you can work with them to first identify those families and maybe train them in the skills needed to train families to work at the systems level, that can sometimes have a much bigger impact and more of a make it more of a difference over time. And sometimes I stop and reflect on things we've done, and the less my face was seen at anything. Sometimes I think that maybe, now sometimes it's very important to be there in person, but sometimes the more we can set things up without our having to actually be the ones doing it, the more successful something is. So these are just some lessons we've learned, and I think this is basically a reiteration of some of the things I've already talked about, but get to know your state and the different areas and the partners in those different areas. And they're probably they are going to be very different in different parts of the state. I also think it's really important, we talk about this a lot in our organization, to not, I know the emphasis on cultural diversity and cultural responsiveness and cultural humility are very, very important. I also think we talk a lot about, but it's important not to let that become diverting us from also looking at difficult issues related to class and racism and things like that can really be a barrier reaching out in any community, but especially going into a rural community where there may be a lot of things that community has had to deal with, and that's especially true in Mississippi, but I think every state has to deal with that. And being able to look at ourselves and our programs and to see if they really do at all levels reflect the communities that we're trying to reach out to, and it's not about one group of people who may have more privilege or have a less difficult history being the ones who are trying to provide a service to another group that hasn't had the same privilege or opportunities that group has. So to just be sensitive to those issues and not let looking at cultural diversity prevent us from looking at some of those deeper kind of structural racism issues. It's also important to find out what families are actually interested in. If everybody's at the school or there's a church and that's where the nucleus of the community is and the nucleus of activity is, to go to that place. I think creativity cannot be overemphasized. We have found with families, this is just one example, some of the families that have emerged that have been interested, families of young children who have emerged who've been interested in things, we've first gotten to know at events where diapers were being given away. Well, it just makes sense that that's where families of young children would be. So just being really, really aware of what's going on in communities and non-traditional ways to partner. And then also, and this kind of goes along with that, to align with events and activities already in place, especially ones that really reinforce the culture of that community and their history and what they want. And if you can do that, chances are you can embed family leadership opportunities into that community in a way that's going to survive far past that particular project. And we've seen things like when say, aligning with a school that's really, really involved in the community, and if the parent who goes through leadership training is then able to work at the school, then that's something that can be there beyond the project. I'm sorry, were you saying my name? Or is that someone just sneezing? But that is the end of my slides. Were there any thoughts or questions?
Thanks for that, Joy. I have just a question or two to get started while we wait for everybody else to kind of chat in with their questions. But thanks for that really excellent presentation. I think you kind of gave us some things to get started thinking on. My question would be, how do you get new families interested in assuming some leadership roles?
The first thing that comes to my mind is it seems like the more that outreach to someone who's new can be done by another family, the more effective it is. And I think we all have that feeling when we're new to something and we don't know quite what we think, and we're a little bit intimidated and scared that we may not know how to do that thing. If somebody else who's been recently through it, like another family or peer support specialist, can do the outreach, I think that tends to be more of an engaging way to get families involved.
Thanks for that. I think that's a great way of reinforcing then for the family who was just through the training, through starting leadership. I think that's a great way of reinforcing their leadership. We have a question about, is there a level of distrust when working with a Choctaw Nation?
We have just started that journey, and I would say it has taken a while to even begin the journey because of that. And I think a lot of that is us, that wasn't an area where we did a lot of outreach. But that's one reason where we're working, we're trying to work really hard to partner with people who already have a trusting relationship with the Choctaw Nation here. Like we have a social worker who has done a whole lot of work for years and years, who is kind of being a cultural broker for us. And then we are very fortunate in Mississippi that we have a psychiatrist who is Native American who does a lot of work with the Choctaw Nation. And he has in the past kind of been that cultural broker for us as well. But yes.
Thank you. And one more question. Community stakeholders at a new nonprofit organization, how do they kind of go about making those connections and reaching out to those stakeholders?
My first thought is, and I just think there's something about that whole nonprofit world where we tend to put up our walls and be a little bit competitive instead of collaborative, and we work really hard on not doing that here, but for all I know, we do it some too. I think one of the, and this is more just about building relationships, I think one of the most helpful things is to reach out and find out more about what the other partners are doing. You know, being able to say, we're starting something new, but we would like to learn from you and find out more about what you're doing so that we can make sure we're supporting it. And if you start with that kind of openness and wanting to learn from others, and it's not artificial, I think that opens some doors. But that is a hard position to be in. And then if there is one group that you have that alliance with, to have them help you forge some of those relationships too.
I think that's a really solid suggestion. Thank you. And if you have questions, keep them coming. We're going to thank you for your time, Joy. We're going to move on to Wendy Luckenbill now. But again, we'll have some questions available for Wendy at the end of her presentation. So as questions come to you, feel free to chat them in, and we could also open it up to more questions for Joy as they come up. But we'll turn over to Wendy Luckenbill.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on this Friday afternoon. And I want to introduce myself to you just quickly in that you probably noticed that I work for a managed care organization. We serve 41 counties in Pennsylvania, but for 30 years I've been a family advocate in Pennsylvania and nationally. And I did a lot of work in juvenile justice over the last decade or so. But when our state governor defunded our mental health association, who I was working for at the time, the managed care company stepped up and hired me. And I know there's other behavioral health managed care companies across the state that have families embedded in the leadership to help bring the family voice. I also support the youth voice. Very exciting. And I just want to add to Joy's wonderful overview, including her portrayal of her state as very rural. I live in a very rural part of Pennsylvania. They often joke that Pennsylvania is all rural in between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. I drove across the state one time with a person from Philadelphia, and once we got past the middle of the state, which is Harrisburg, she looked around with big eyes and said, "What do you do out here?" She just was astounded. She had never seen so many miles of just woods and farms and uninhabited areas. So we are definitely not a frontier state, but we definitely have a lot of the challenges that all rural communities have. So let's see what I brought to the table for us to talk about. This is my company. We're part of University of Pitt. As I said, we partner with 41 counties to manage just the behavioral health services under our MA-funded Health Choice program, and our mission is to improve the health and well-being of the community through delivery of effective, cost-efficient, and accessible behavioral health services, which actually, as you can guess, is a lot harder than it sounds. So I have a question to start us with. Oh, are you going to put that question up for us? Okay. Where does your family engagement efforts break down is my question. So I'll be talking about some ideas as we go forward. But do I have to do something to make this happen? There should be three questions. In the beginning, in the middle, or the end? Maybe we're just asking for you to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
We can see it, Wendy.
Oh, okay, I cannot. Okay. Well,
I'll help you kind of interpreting the results since you can't see it. But right now we've got people chiming in. Most of them are saying, and I encourage everyone on the line to still continue to answer the poll. Right now it's looking, most people are saying in the beginning, over 50% of the respondents are saying in the beginning, about 30% are saying in the middle, and about 14% are saying at the end. And they're changing a little bit as people are continuing to respond to the poll, so please continue. But those percentages are pretty much staying close to where they are. So about 50% say at the beginning, about 35% say at the middle, and about 13% say at the end. So I think, anybody else want to vote before we close this up? All right, Wendy, I'm sorry you couldn't see that, but it did end up being those consistent percentages.
Okay. Okay, now I do not have my slides here now.
So Wendy, it looks like you may have gotten kicked out. So go ahead and re-click on that link right in your email or your calendar appointment, and we'll give you about 30 seconds to get reconnected with us.
Okay, all right.
No worries, just a little technical difficulty, folks. So give us about 30 seconds to a minute to get reconnected.
That sounds good. And Tiara, while we're waiting for Wendy to log back in, perhaps you could put that link to Ideas at the Institute back in the public chat box. For those of you that may have signed on a few minutes late, the TA Network has a new platform that we're using to support all of our learning communities. There are several of them aside from the rural mental health learning community, and we're going to have lots of resources available through that platform. And you can join multiple learning communities, that meet your interests. And so you do have to set up your own account. It's super easy. You just use your own email address and come up with a password, and then you log in and you have access to lots of good resources, and all the past webinars and all the going forward, all the recordings of the webinar, of these webinars, and the PowerPoints are going to be available through that platform as well. So really would encourage everyone to go ahead and sign in and create their own account. So Wendy, do we have you back?
I'm back. I just want to say thank you for your, can you hear me okay? You can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, great. So thanks for the input. And since I've been doing this for about 30 years, when I first started in my county as a family partner in 1992, I had really two charges. The first one was to reach out and support other families, and the other was to start an advisory group. So I talked to the state organization at the time, the families that were down in Philadelphia, and they just laughed. They said, do you know how hard it is to get families to come to an advisory group? And so I think 30 years later, that is still an area where we really struggle. It's one thing to reach out and provide support for families, but to engage their voices in the work of system reform and system design is still really challenging. So when I got hired by Community Care, the one thing they really wanted was a family advisory board. We had a MAB, a member advisory board, but they wanted a family advisory board. And luckily, I have not only the credibility of being a family advocate, but a lot of experience in bringing families to the table. So I wanted to share our successes, particularly because almost all the families that are on our board, and they represent all our contracts, well, not our 41 counties, but primarily they are rural. And we are a companion to the MAB, the Member Advisory Board. We advise our corporate and regional levels. We are families of children or youth who have received services. Some of our members are grandparents or have young adult children, but they have that experience. And again, to underline what Joyce said about finding, she didn't use the term squeaky wheel, but the person who's down at the local office trying to change services or access services for their child. I would say all the families on our board are families who came to be known to us because they had a concern, if not an outright grievance or complaint, and were really upset about the way services were happening for their children. And to take that frustration and despair and turn that into something that helps not only their family but other families, it can be really rewarding. You'll see we meet 4 times a year. We do support with stipends and travel and child care, and we've been around since 2013, so we're coming up on our, we just finished our 6th anniversary. And the pictures that I'm sharing with you are our members. And we do get from the FAB ongoing advice and direction for our programs and policies, which has become, as we've done the work, it's become more and more relied on, and it's not just a pro forma, we have a family advisory board. It's like, oh my gosh, do you have any room on your agenda, because I've got to ask the families this. We have also representation at our local family advisory meetings, so most of the FAB members also participate in our local outreach, which we do. And we create products. The one that we're most proud of is our family voice video, which is really helpful for families to see. It's on our website. And it's been critical in the provider training and system reform work that we're doing. It ensures that we always have a family voices of, many different perspectives as we're trying to invoke what needs to be their voice. So it's good to have one family that comes, but this provides us with a whole video. So please I hope you can take a look at our video. It's only 11 minutes. So our FAB members are experts in child and youth mental health and related services and supports by virtue of their lived experience. So they really bring an expertise that none of the other partners and stakeholders that we have can bring. They are known to us through their efforts to get quality care for their own children, as I said, with our care management and community relations folks. They're working in their communities to make things better through homegrown or organized efforts. So once again, that was something that Joy emphasized, that there are people in the community who are trying to do things. One of my family advisors at my county level founded a Boy Scout troop for young boys with disabilities because they weren't able to participate, at least in 92, 93, especially kids with behavioral health problems. They weren't able to participate in the local scout troop, so she formed her own scout troop and then started working at the state and national level to advance that kind of vision for the scouts. So there are people out there who understand that things get better if everybody joins together. They also do a lot of one-to-one volunteer work for other families. They just sort of accidentally walk into it or deliberately join some kind of parent-to-parent group or some kind of group where they become volunteers, but none of them are paid advocates at this point. And we really are diverse and are very mindful of that. So we have a lot of rural members. We have two members that are from the big city of Pittsburgh. And then we have some mid-sized cities like York, and we have good representation from them. It's very diverse. I'm sorry about the dogs. And we're a good group. So we have some recommendations about engaging rural families, since about half of our members are rural and they do a lot of work, maybe driving across counties to try to get to a meeting. There's very little transportation. So they recommend, first of all, make it clear what's in it for me. Because no matter how much people would like to be involved in helping other people, they really need to know that there's something in it for them. It could be advancing leadership skills, but it's usually something about making sure that they get connected to the help that they need for their own family. Go where families are. We go to grocery stores and other shopping areas, especially on paydays, school events, social clubs, Rod and Gun, the VA, houses of worship, fairs. You really need to go where the families are. If you just put an ad in the newspaper, we found nobody shows up. Give out information and have a family member to do peer support on site. And again, as Joy said, just hearing that somebody else has walked the walk is very comforting. And I would just say the isolation of having a child with a behavioral health disorder is really compounded by the isolation and individualization that occurs naturally in a rural setting. So being connected to others that are in the same boat can be very unlikely, and having a peer is very important. Social media has become a really strong tool, use of like the Zoom video calls, to talk to other people, use of Facebook. There's a lot of families that are very active in social media, and it's a great way to connect. And in Pennsylvania, it may be the phone may be the only way that families are getting on the internet, because we still have large areas where there is not internet available unless you're on the phone. We also think it's helpful to hold community meetings on local topics with speakers. You should be asking people what they want next and do follow-up This is not rural, but one of our members is from York, Pennsylvania, which is one of the most beleaguered cities in our state, probably the most. There's so many shootings, and it's a very scary place to be living. So she's been holding a lot of community meetings on those issues, but they get into the deeper issues of social services and so forth. And that's been a good way to engage, but she does a lot of outreach, emailing, calling, finding out what people want to talk about. So it's really being driven by, again, that idea of what's in it for me. Follow-up, we think, is absolutely critical. I can't tell you how many groups I've talked to that don't send out anything that lets families know what the input from their concerns, how that impacted change. And we think it's really important to model persistence, respect, and hope at all times. So those are sort of some big recommendations. So here's some of our slogans, and you may have heard these before because they've been around for a long time, but it's really important that part of a family's experience is learning the culture of family, voice, and activism. So certainly nothing about us without us. Each one, teach one. Children are not little adults. Learning these principles really helps people feel like they can participate. And again, this was our one member who really made it her mantra. What is in it for me? We emphasize at the FAB that it's not just about telling your story, which often becomes just a repeated re-victimization and re-traumatization of what a family may have gone through trying to get services or just trying to help their child. So we assume that the families are experts. They don't need to ever justify by telling a story or sharing a diagnosis. We make sure that this is about getting help and support for their own lives, about being connected to peers, about experiencing the affirmation of their journey, and about demonstrating agency, which, you know, we have found is so important. It's almost like you begin to see people stand up straighter as they regain their dignity by being affirmed for their experience and their expertise. We have some guideposts, which one time I presented them with our FAB members at a conference, and they said, the one FAB member said, "Oh, that's what you're doing at the meetings. I had never shared these with him." So now I share them all the time. So the first thing we do is we focus on competencies, but we also assure confidentiality. Families give their perspective and advice on issues, but aren't expected to provide specific details of their family's experience. And we think this is really important because those stories will live on. So the 8-year-old and his diagnosis and the medication that he's on becomes the 15-year-old and the 25-year-old with children. And we think that confidentiality is really important. So talking about families' experience is much different than sharing publicly the intimate details of our family lives. Be supportive. Connect families with resources, including each other, to resolve any immediate and longer-term problems that they are finding, that they are facing. Give contact information and family peer support resources. And this is really important. A lot of families come to advisory meetings that are really in crisis. And if you're talking about, well, how are we going to get this done next year or in 5 years, and you're not finding out and giving them immediate help that they need, they may never come back. So you don't have to do that as part of the public meeting, but just assure that if anybody has a personal question, please talk to them at a break, email or call me, and don't leave us without feeling like you got the personal help that you need. Offer hope is so important. Let them know that this is an effort is part of a change process that rejects blaming families, celebrates their strength, and is committed to partnering with them to achieve positive change. That they are being invited as crucial partners in this transformative work to make things better so that people will have healthier lives in healthier communities. So that is indeed important, particularly because families often do feel victimized by systems that are hard to use. And the other side of that is giving perspective, that letting families know that people come to human services to do good, but too frequently they are not given the information and tools to truly achieve the objectives they are responsible for. So this is something that we're asking families to help with. A lot of times families feel like the people that work in the system are against them. One of our FAB members said for many months at many meetings, the only reason the human service workers are there is for the buck. They're there just for the money. And part of the transformative work that we engage in FAB is learning to respect the human journey for everybody, and that includes the people that are providing the services. We do validate system experiences, acknowledging the journey that they've been on, and really letting them know it's only within the last decade or so that we've really started to have the evidence that we needed to really change things. And people used to make decisions based on gut decisions that weren't necessarily based on any science. We really believe in follow-up. As I said, you have to share the outcomes of people's shared input. If somebody takes the time to come and give you their concerns and input, you need to follow up in many different ways, in emails, and I always send a regular hard copy in the mail because not everybody has email or might miss it. So there's lots of ways to make sure everybody knows we heard you and we did something about it. We concretely recognize members' contributions by reimbursing them for time and so forth, and we affirm their heroism. So we take a lot of time during the meetings to give affirmations. Thank you for sharing. We really appreciate your time. That was so helpful. That really made a difference the way that you said that. Those affirmations are really critical. So the constant feedback that's created involves these questions. Do you think community care valued your input and the input of other members? So we actually asked this in the annual survey. Did community care provide enough follow-up? Did you gain better understanding of child and youth mental health services? That's always a big teaching moment. People come with their idea of how they think services work, which are often really confused with how all the systems work or different objectives. So that's part of what we try to promote our leaders in learning. Did you gain a better understanding of how to access and use services for children and youth, which is again confusing to people? Did you gain a better understanding of how to improve your community's behavioral health services? Did your membership give you opportunities for your own personal growth? Did the meeting topics relate to your own experiences and concerns? And were you able to provide your input on discussed topics? So those are things that we ask annually, but we really, in many ways, ask those at every meeting. We check in and see how people are doing and how well they think they're supported. Were you able to provide input? Did you get to know and learn from other members? Did you get enough support for your attendance and travel? And all this stuff is going to be part of the follow-up for the webinar, so you'll get copies of all that. So one of the things that I like to do is ask people, I offer people this checklist, based on what I've been teaching in this session. I ask people, to try to check in how they are doing. So what are you doing to support family involvement in the community? How do you assure confidentiality? How are you supportive? How are you offering hope, giving perspective, validating system experiences, and so on? So you can sort of have a scorecard to go back there and get busy strengthening what you're already doing. And I also want to let you know that here's some essential, really golden oldies that I think are still very relevant to our work. If you've never read Unclaimed Children, which was by Jane Nitzer and started the whole children's change reform system in this country, it's a wonderful read. And the recommendations, this was actually commissioned by Congress, the U.S. Congress. The recommendations she gave us we're still actually very devoted to and struggling with, I say. The one is that diverting funding away from more restrictive levels of care for community services, I think, is still our goal. And the other is making sure that families are partners in their child's care and in system reform. We're still working for her. So if you haven't ever read Jane Nitzer, you can find all these books on Amazon. She's the godmother of our movement. Stuck in Time are stories that were written about families in Pennsylvania, and I think again you'll see that you're still hearing those stories where kids fall through the cracks. And finally, the books by Charlotte Desjardins, who's a family advocate, and I think they're from Wisconsin or Michigan, their group. But these are really great books. How to Get Services by Being Assertive is a series of about 50 little vignettes of how families can become more assertive and really less aggressive. And I always say, I know how to return something at Walmart until they say no. And then I really don't know what to do. And so imagine that skill level, which is pretty much my top skill level. Imagine me now going into a school or a human service agency and saying, this is what I want, and them saying no. And what do you know how to do besides raise your voice and pound on the counter? Well, this book teaches families how to be assertive. And the other book is about really good advice about organizing effective family advocacy groups. So both really good books, and here's our section for more questions.
Thanks so much for that, Wendy. That was really informative. I want to remind everybody you're welcome to chat any questions that you have for Wendy. Wendy will take questions, and also if you have anything for Joy, let us know. But Wendy, I have a question for you. As a provider who's working with families and maybe not having as much success as I might like, how do I really get my peers and my supervisor in my agency to really understand how that we really need to meaningfully include families if some of my my efforts are falling flat? How can I make sure that my supervisor stays on board with me?
Well, this is a really easy answer, and I'm sure there's more complex ones too, but a really easy answer is to ask to share the video that I referred to, and I can share the questions that I came up with. We have a discussion guide that we use in training, so I'd be happy to follow up with that because we are so pleased with that video. We do a lot of training for our providers under community care. Sometimes there's 100 in the room. And I'm always amazed how moved the providers are by hearing those family voices and how changed they are. A lot of times they are people that are brand new to the behavioral health field. This is their first job. But sometimes they're administrators and have been in the field for 30 years. And even though you'd think that they speak with families every day, somehow this video captures families and the family perspective in a way that they haven't experienced before. They're very moved by the family struggles. They're very heartened by the family affirmations they were able to find help in some ways. So that video is one way to do that, but it's really finding ways to get everybody to understand we're all humans. So if you have a good book, that would be something that maybe get everybody to read. There's a new one called David and Goliath that's pretty good about understanding how it feels to be the underdog. So maybe part of this rural collaborative is starting to share those resources that can change hearts and minds.
That's a good suggestion for follow-up. Thank you, Wendy.
You're
How
welcome.
do you go about preparing family leaders for their first meeting on a committee or a council?
Well, I do think it's very important to have that one-on-one discussion. So if somebody's nominated to be on this group or any group that I've ever facilitated, I have spent a lot of time talking to that family one-on-one, at least 3 hours, and at least 1 or 2 of those hours is hearing their story and doing some brainstorming about any areas that they're concerned with or they're struggling with, linking them with any resources that might be in their community or statewide so that they really feel hopeful and respectful and heard. And then within that discussion, I start to weave this idea that there's some of us out there that are very dedicated to doing system change, and that, yes, things were very different. You know, the kids were considered little adults, that families lost custody of kids and still do to get levels of care, and that we're really trying to take the best of science and that we understand a lot more about what actually helps families and kids, but we're also engaged in this very long struggle that started with Jane Nitzer of designing a system that's not reactionary, but that is actually proactive and authentically supports everybody. So we have really long discussions, usually by phone.
Thanks for that. All right, so I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon now to wrap up.
Yes, thanks. Thank you so much, Christina, for helping facilitate that, and to Wendy and Joy both for your presentations and your insights, sharing your lessons learned and guidance. I think it was very helpful, and I really like those guideposts. I think that's what you called them, the 8 guideposts. I think I really hope that our participants will take that back home and actually put them to use. Just looking to see if there's anything that's coming in the chat box for additional questions. Lauren Jones has a comment: as an alternative to nominating people to become leaders, we have designed an application process where interested family members apply for the designated slot. Yes, I've had experience with that too. We've done that in a couple of the system of care efforts that I've been a part of. We had the same type of process, and you can either nominate family members can either, apply directly, or you can actually take nominations from family organizations. So there's different ways to do that as well. But any final questions for Joy or for Wendy? I think, this has been really helpful. Clearly, there's not an easy 1, 2, 3, do this, and then we'll have the level of partnership and the level of, ongoing strong family leader and infrastructure. It takes work, has been what I have experienced in my own career, and also in working with different sites and communities over the past several years as providing technical assistances. Systems of care, being family-driven, is a fundamental value, and family-run organizations are an important mechanism for for a lot of things that will get a system to be family-driven, whether it's frontline practice, whether it's, evaluation, whether it's system, designing the way the system should be organized. And I think a lot of times we can default to just sort of parsing out contract dollars in different ways and thinking about, how those grant dollars should be used or something like that. But I think, one of the things that's important for us all as we're working to build systems of care to recognize is that, for those folks on the service delivery and on the system administration, the sort of professional side of the, the provider side or the bureaucratic side of the system of care where we live, is that investment in family-run organizations is really just that. It's an investment, and it needs to be done deliberately and intentionally, proactively, with the goal of building that family infrastructure so that that is a core partner for initial system of care development and ongoing expansion and sustainability. And it's worth that investment of time, money, dollars, relationships, whatever it takes to really have that strong family organization there as an ongoing partner that can then provide long-term development for family voice, family leadership, all the things that we want to engage individual family members in terms of organizing and building and running the system of care, but families need structure and support, and the best way to achieve that is from families get that from each other, from an organized family infrastructure. And so, being deliberate about making that investment and being strategic about making that investment, as early as we can to then have that robust family voice and leadership grow over time. It's an important perspective for system of care development, but it's something that I think is not always easy for the provider professional side of the world to understand how to do that. So I think this has been a really good conversation today and really appreciate everyone's input. Again, encourage you to join the rural learning community through that link that we had provided earlier. We really are trying to move this away from a webinar series to more of a true sharing, interactive learning community. So we really do invite your feedback. We invite you contacting any of us that you had as leads at the beginning of the PowerPoint, myself, Matt, Christina, Sarah. And here's Wendy and Joy's emails directly if you have any follow-up questions for them following today. They welcome you to contact them directly as well. I think and the link for the evaluation, it only will take just a few minutes. It's in the public chat box as well, and we really would welcome your feedback for that. Any of my colleagues have any closing comments, or presenters have any closing comments or remarks?
You know what, this is Wendy. I just wanted to say to underscore your wonderful description of how important it is to support the family voice. I think the other learning for community care has been how critical the family voice was to actually do the work that we're trying to do. And that's certainly been my experience all along, is that the family voice is not only important for the families, it's really important for the systems, and if they're trying to seek to deliver truly quality care. So it's a mutual admiration society for sure.
Thank you, Wendy.
You're welcome.
All right. All right. Well, stay tuned. We'll have our next webinar in September, and it will be advertised in the TA Telegram, and also through the Ideas at the Institute platform. And we thank you again for joining us today and look forward to ongoing interaction with you all. Have a great weekend.